The wolf was dying. Wren pressed her small hand flat against the frozen ground beside him, and the pain hit her like a wall of black water. Waves of it, dense and suffocating, flooding up through her palm, her wrist, her chest, agony so thick she could taste iron on the back of her tongue. She pulled her hand back, breathed. She was 7 years old. She was alone in the woods, and she could feel everything he felt. That was the problem with Wren. That had always been the problem with Wren. Other children touched a scraped knee and cried about their own pain. When Wren touched something suffering, she became it. She absorbed it the way dry earth swallows rain, completely, without resistance. Her aunt called it a curse. Her uncle called it a nuisance. The village children called her Ghost Girl because her face went white and hollow whenever she wandered too close to something hurting. She wandered close to everything hurting. The wolf lay on his side at the edge of the tree line, half buried in snow, his silver fur matted dark at the flank. He was enormous. Even collapsed, even barely breathing, he was the largest living thing she had ever seen up close. His ribcage rose, fell, rose again, slower each time. His eyes found her. Not with fear, not with warning, with something she had no word for at 7 years old, something she would spend years learning to name. Recognition. Like he had been waiting. Like some part of him had called out across the frozen forest, and some part of her had heard it and come. Wren's fingers found the small silver locket at her throat, her mother's locket, the one cold thing that never felt cold to her. She held it, and she looked at the wolf, and she made the only decision that made sense to a child built the way she was built. She knelt beside him in the snow. She did not run for help. She did not weigh the danger. She pressed both hands gently against his side, and she let his suffering move through her like a current, because if she was carrying it, he was carrying less. That was her gift. That was her wound. No one had ever called it brave before. The wolf exhaled, long, shuddering, almost a sound, and his body stilled beneath her hands. Not gone, just quieter, like something inside him had been turned down from a scream to a breath. His golden eyes stayed on her face. And deep in the marrow of that frozen morning, in a forest where no one would have thought to look for either of them, something ancient and impossible began. She came back the next morning. And the morning after that. She told no one. The farmhouse where Wren lived with her Uncle Drav and Aunt Sella sat at the edge of Millhaven village like an afterthought, cramped, cold, smelling permanently of boiled root and resentment. She had lived there since she was 4, since the fever took her mother, and left behind nothing but silence and a silver locket. Uncle Drav tolerated her the way a man tolerates a leak in the roof, grudgingly, and only because fixing it requires more effort than enduring it. Aunt Sella did not tolerate her at all. She simply looked through her, the way people look through glass they have forgotten is there. The forest was the only place that felt like breathing. And now the forest had him. She named him Ash, not because he was gray, though he was silver gray, the color of winter sky an hour before snow. She named him Ash because the first morning she returned and found him still alive, still breathing, she had felt something loosen in her chest. Something she had been holding since her mother died. Something that had been burning quietly for 3 years, finally releasing into soft, cool nothing. Ash, like the end of fire, like the beginning of something else. He was still too weak to stand on the second day. She brought what she could, scraps of salted meat wrapped in cloth, tucked inside her coat where Aunt Sella wouldn't notice. She set them near his muzzle and sat back and waited. He watched her with those golden eyes. Still and measuring, the way ancient things watch when they are deciding whether to trust. He ate. On the 4th day, he lifted his head when she arrived. On the 6th, he sat up. She kept coming, every morning before the farmhouse stirred, slipping out through the back door into the blue dark cold. Every evening when she was sent to gather wood, she gathered it slowly, wandering wide, spending 20 stolen minutes in the tree line. She brought food when she could. When she couldn't, she brought herself. She would sit with her back against an oak and her knees pulled to her chest, and Ash would move gradually, day by day, inch by inch closer. By the 12th day, he rested his enormous head in her lap. She stopped breathing for a moment. Then she placed her hand very carefully on the top of his skull between his ears, warm, dense with life, his eyes closed. She felt it again, that current moving between them. But it was different now. It was not pain flowing out of him into her. It was something else entirely. Something without a name she had been taught. Steady and deep, like a note held at the bottom of a very old bell. She thought, without knowing why, he has been alone longer than I have. On the 15th day, he stood for the first time. He was even larger upright. His shoulder reached her chin. He stood in a shaft of pale morning light filtering through the bare branches, and she saw it clearly for the first time, a scar running from his left shoulder down across his ribs. Old and deep. The kind that doesn't come from animals or accidents. The kind that comes from a blade. Ren reached out slowly. He did not move. She pressed 2 fingers to the scar, and the vision crashed into her like a door blown open in a storm. A palace, gold and cold and enormous. A throne room where a man stood in long dark robes, his face arranged into something that was not quite a smile. A young man on his knees before him, proud, even kneeling, shoulders refusing to drop, and words spoken like a sentence of death. You will remember what you are, and you will forget what you were. The vision broke. Ren stumbled back. Ash caught her one massive shoulder pressing against her side, solid as stone, holding her upright. She stared at him. He stared back. And in the particular silence of the forest, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Ren understood something that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the wolf, about the scar, about why his golden eyes held a sorrow so structured it could only belong to someone who remembered being something more. He was not just a wolf. He had never been just a wolf. And whoever had made him this way, whoever wore that cold almost smile in a palace of gold, was still out there. Still waiting. Still in possession of whatever had been taken from the creature, now standing in the snow beside a 7-year-old girl who could feel everything, pressing his warmth against her trembling shoulder as if to say, I have you. I have you. Don't let go. She grabbed a fistful of silver fur. She did not let go. She should have been more careful. She knew that. Some part of her had always known that, the same part that kept her voice low in the farmhouse, that learned early to move through rooms like smoke, taking up no space, leaving no trace. The part of her that had survived 3 years under Uncle Drav's roof by making herself invisible. But Ash had made her careless. Not reckless, not foolish, just present. For the first time in 3 years, Ren had somewhere to be that wanted her there. Something that lifted its head when she arrived. Something that pressed its warmth against her side in the dark and made the cold feel smaller. And when you have lived on nothing for long enough, the first taste of something real makes you forget to watch the edges. She forgot to watch the edges. It was the 17th morning. Earlier than usual, the sky still bruised purple, the farmhouse still breathing the slow breath of sleep. She had woken from a dream she couldn't hold, only the feeling of it remaining, urgent and formless, pulling her toward the tree line. She dressed in the dark. She did not check the hallway. She did not hear the floorboard. The forest was quiet in the particular way it gets just before dawn, not empty quiet, but held quiet, every creature paused and listening for the signal to begin again. Ash was waiting at the familiar oak, standing now with his full weight on all 4 legs, the wound at his flank reduced to a scar that pulled slightly when he moved. He looked in the pale pre-dawn like something carved from the forest itself. Ancient. Permanent. He saw her and his tail moved once. Just once. The smallest acknowledgement. It was enough. It was everything. She crossed to him and buried her face briefly in the fur at his neck, and breathed him in pine and cold earth, and something underneath that she had come to think of as simply him. And for 4 minutes, the world was exactly the right size. Then Ash's head came up. Not toward her, past her. His golden eyes locked on something behind the tree line, back in the direction of the farmhouse, and a sound built in his chest, not quite a growl. Lower than that. A warning pressed down under control, the way you press a hand over a wound to keep what's inside from getting out. Ren turned. Uncle Drav stood at the edge of the trees. He was still in his sleeping clothes, a heavy coat thrown over them, his boots unlaced. He had clearly dressed in a hurry. He had clearly been following her for some portion of the walk because there was no surprise on his face when she turned, only the expression of a man whose suspicion has just been confirmed, which is a different thing entirely. Colder, more satisfied. His eyes moved from Wren to Ash and back to Wren. Something shifted behind them. Not fear exactly, calculation. "Drav," she started. "Don't." His voice was quiet. That was the worst part. Uncle Drav was most dangerous when he was quiet. Shouting meant he was reacting. Quiet meant he had already decided. How long? It wasn't a question. Wren's hand was still resting on Ash's neck. She felt the vibration in his chest, steady and controlled, and she drew from it like warmth from a coal. "He's not dangerous," she said. "He was hurt. I was helping him." "How long, Wren?" 17 days. Something moved across his face. A ripple of something she might have called shame in another man. In Uncle Drav it moved through and was gone before it could take hold, the way water moves over stone without changing it. He looked at Ash for a long moment. Ash looked back, still, immovable, the golden eyes giving nothing. Then Drav looked back at his niece, small, 7 years old, standing in the pre-dawn dark in an unlaced coat with her hand buried in the fur of a wolf the size of a young horse, and Wren saw it happen in real time. She watched him choose. Not her. He had never been going to choose her. She understood that now with the specific, settling clarity of something that was always true finally being said aloud. She was the leak in the roof. She was the inconvenience. She was the dead sister's daughter left on a doorstep and tolerated, never held, never chosen. He turned and walked back toward the farmhouse without another word. She almost let herself believe that was the end of it. She almost believed he was walking away. She was still standing there, still pressed against Ash's side, still trying to slow her heartbeat when she heard it, the farmhouse door. Opening. Then a second sound further away from the direction of the village road. Hoofbeats. Ash heard it too. His entire body changed, that still, carved quality replaced by something coiled and immediate, every muscle reorganizing itself from rest into readiness. He turned his great head toward the road, then back to Wren. The golden eyes held something she had not seen in them before. Urgency. And underneath the urgency, grief. Like he had always known this morning would come. Like he had known it from the first moment she pressed her small hand against his side in the snow and took his pain into herself and stayed anyway. Like he had been dreading it and treasuring their time in equal measure, holding both things together because that is what you do when you have learned that beautiful things end. The hoofbeats grew louder. Uncle Drav had not walked away. Uncle Drav had walked toward the road, toward the village, toward the one man in Millhaven who paid good coin for information about unusual animals spotted in the surrounding forest. A man named Cale Mordrin. And Mordrin's men did not come empty-handed. Wren grabbed Ash's fur in both fists. Her knuckles went white. "Run," she whispered. But Ash did not run. He planted his feet in the frozen earth, pressed himself against her side, and faced the sound of the approaching horses with the quiet, terrible stillness of something that has survived worse than this and intends to survive it still, but will not leave the girl behind to do it. He would not leave her. Not even now. Not even for this. And that singular, impossible loyalty from a creature who owed her nothing, who had been given kindness when the world offered only cruelty and chose to return it threefold, broke something open in Wren's chest so wide and so deep that she stopped being afraid. She stopped being small. She looked toward the tree line where the hoofbeats grew, and she felt her mother's locket warm against her sternum, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her. Not this time. They came through the tree line like a wound splitting open. 4 horses, 4 riders, dark coats, torches held high despite the gathering dawn, the kind of men who carried weapons the way other men carry tools, casually, without thought, because violence was simply their profession. At the front, riding a horse the color of old blood, was Cale Mordrin himself. Ren had seen him once before from a distance, at the village market. He had seemed ordinary then. Medium height, medium build, the kind of face that slides out of memory the moment you look away. But up close, in the half-dark, with his torch throwing orange light across the planes of his face, there was nothing ordinary about him. His eyes moved across the clearing the way a blade moves, quick, precise, already calculating the cut before it lands. They found Ash. They stopped. Even Mordrin's horse stuttered, a sideways step, a toss of the head, nostrils flaring. The animal knew. Animals always knew what Ren knew, what anyone who had ever stood close to Ash eventually understood, that this was not simply a wolf. That something old and enormous lived behind those golden eyes, and it was currently deciding exactly how much of itself to reveal. Step away from the animal, girl. Mordrin's voice was pleasant. That was the most frightening thing about it. Warm, almost, reasonable. The voice of a man who has never needed to shout because he has never encountered a situation that did not resolve itself in his favor. Ren did not step away. She pressed closer. Ash's chest vibrated against her back, that low, controlled sound, the warning held under pressure. She felt his heartbeat through his ribs, steady, deliberate. He was afraid. She could feel it moving through their connection like a cold current beneath warm water, but he was not going to show it. He was going to stand here in this clearing with this small girl pressed against his side, and he was going to hold. "Last time," Mordrin said, and the pleasantness dropped out of his voice like a coin falling through a crack. "Step away." Ren's fingers found the locket. She didn't decide what happened next. It moved through her the way her gift always moved, not chosen, not controlled, simply arriving, the way breath arrives after being held too long. She pressed the locket flat against her sternum with one hand and reached the other back to lay her palm against Ash's wounded flank, and she pushed. Not physically, not with her body. With everything she had been carrying. 3 years of silence. 3 years of invisible and tolerated and looked through. 3 years of a gift that hurt her, that made her feel the whole world's suffering without anyone once stopping to feel hers. She pushed it outward, all of it not as anger, not as attack, but as truth, as feeling, as the raw, unfiltered weight of what it is to be small and overlooked and still, somehow, to choose kindness anyway. The torches went out. All 4 of them, simultaneously, snuffed as though the darkness simply swallowed them whole. The horses screamed. In the chaos, rearing animals, shouting men, the sudden absolute dark of a forest before sunrise, Ash moved. He turned, dropped his great head to Ren's level, and looked at her with those golden eyes that somehow held their own light, and the message in them was wordless and absolute. "Now, we go now." She grabbed his fur. He surged forward. They ran. Not away from Millhaven, not toward it. Through the deep forest, the places Ren knew by feel and instinct, the paths she had walked 100 times in the gray early mornings when the farmhouse was still sleeping, and the world belonged to her alone. Ash moved through the dark like water finding its level, silent despite his size, his body weaving between trees with a fluid precision that should not have been possible for something so large. Behind them, shouts, the crash of horses being forced through undergrowth. Torches relit, their orange light flickering between trunks. Mordrin was not giving up. Ren ran. Her lungs burned. Her coat caught on a branch and she tore free without slowing, felt the cold air hit the strip of exposed skin at her side, kept running. Ash stayed close, not ahead of her, not pulling but beside her, matching her pace deliberately, checking her with every stride the way a shepherd checks a lamb in a crossing current. Then the bolt came. She heard it before she saw it, a sharp mechanical crack from behind, the kind of sound a crossbow makes when it releases, and she had just enough time to register what it was before Ash slammed into her from the left. Not attacking, shielding. He threw his body across her path and took the bolt in his right shoulder. The impact drove a sound from him, not a cry, something deeper, something that went through Ren's bones like a struck bell, and he stumbled, one leg buckling, catching himself before he went down. Ash. He righted himself. The bolt was still in him. He looked at her with those steady gold eyes, and the expression in them was so unbearably familiar, so recognizable as something she had felt herself. The face of a creature absorbing pain quietly so someone else won't have to, that her throat sealed completely. He had taken it for her, without hesitation, without calculation, the way she had knelt in the snow 17 mornings ago and taken his suffering into her own hands without once asking whether it was wise. He had learned it from her. Or perhaps he had always known it. Perhaps that was why she had heard him calling through the frozen forest that first morning. Because they were built the same way, she and this ancient, impossible creature. Because kindness recognizes kindness across every boundary, across species, across silence, across whatever wall of curse and captivity had been built around him by a man in a palace with cold eyes and a colder smile. She grabbed his fur on the uninjured side. He leaned into her. They kept moving. The forest began to thin. Ahead, through the last stand of trees, a shape emerged from the dark. A cabin, small and low, lamplight burning in one window with the particular steadiness of a light left on by someone who expected to need it. A curl of smoke from the chimney. A door that opened before they reached it, as though whoever was inside had heard them coming long before they arrived. An old man stood in the doorway. He was slight, white-haired, wrapped in a heavy wool coat that had seen several decades of hard winters. He looked at Wren. He looked at Ash, at the bolt, at the blood dark against the silver fur. His expression did not register surprise. It registered something closer to recognition. The specific, weary recognition of a man who has been waiting for a particular thing to happen and has finally stopped being surprised that it has. He stepped back from the door. "Get inside," he said. "Both of you, quickly now." His voice was the kind of voice that had spent a lifetime being trustworthy. Low and unhurried, carrying the particular weight of someone who had once known a great deal about the world and had chosen, carefully, what to do with that knowledge. Wren hesitated for only a second. Ash walked through the door first. She followed. The old man closed it behind them, dropped a heavy bar across the frame, and moved to the window to look out at the dark tree line. His jaw tightened once. Then he turned to the wolf bleeding quietly on his floor and the small girl with her hand still buried in his fur, and something moved through his eyes that might, in better light, have looked like grief. "I wondered," he said softly, more to himself than to either of them, "how long before Mordrin found him." He crossed to the fire, reached for a box on the mantel. "My name is Aldrich," he said, "and we have very little time before they circle the wood." He opened the box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were things Wren did not have words for yet: small glass vessels, dried roots, a knife with a blade that caught the firelight strangely, as though the light itself was uncertain what to do with it. He knelt beside Ash without fear, without hesitation. His hands, when they found the bolt, were completely steady. "Hold him," Aldrich said quietly. Wren pressed both palms flat against Ash's side. She opened herself, all the way, no resistance, the way she had learned to do in the snow that first morning. She took what she could. She carried it. Outside, the hoofbeats circled. The lamp burned. And in the small, warm cabin at the edge of the deep forest, an old man who knew too much and a little girl who felt too much worked together in the firelit dark to keep something rare and ancient and irreplaceable alive for one more night. They came at dawn. Not just Mordrin's riders this time. More. Wren counted 7 horses through the gap in the shutter, their breath clouding in the frozen morning air, torches held high against the pale gray light that had not yet decided whether to become day. Mordrin rode at the front, and beside him, her stomach dropped through the floor, rode Uncle Drav, still in his heavy coat, still with that look on his face. The look of a man who had made a calculation and was committed to its result. Aldrich stood at the center of the room. He had not slept. He had spent the hours between midnight and dawn doing things Wren did not fully understand, moving between the cabin's 4 walls with quiet deliberateness, pressing his fingers to the wood at the joints and corners, murmuring things too low to catch, leaving behind a smell like rain on hot stone. When she asked him what he was doing, he said simply, reminding the walls what they are. She had decided to trust that. Ash was on his feet. The bolt was gone, the wound dressed in something Aldrich had packed against it with the careful hands of a man who had done this before, treated impossible wounds on impossible creatures in small cabins, while the world outside arranged itself against them. He stood at Wren's left shoulder, warm and solid, the faint vibration in his chest the only indication that he was in pain. He was always going to be in pain and stand anyway. She was beginning to understand that about him. The first impact against the door was not a knock. It was a ram, something heavy, swung with intent, the whole frame shuddering and the bar jumping in its brackets. Aldrich did not move. The second impact hit and a crack split the air, sharp as a whip, and Wren felt it in her back teeth. "Aldrich." "Hold your ground," he said, calm, immovable, the voice of someone who had stood in front of worse things than this and was still, evidently, standing. "Whatever you feel coming through that door, do not absorb it. Not this time. Do you understand me?" She didn't, not fully, but she nodded. The door came in on the third hit. Mordrin entered first, which told her something about him, that he led from the front, that his cruelty was not the delegating kind. Two of his men flanked him. Behind them, hanging back at the threshold like a man who has committed to a direction without committing to a destination, was Uncle Drav. Mordrin looked at Ash. Something moved through his face, hunger mostly, but underneath it something that surprised her. Fear, old and deep, the kind that lives in the body rather than the mind, the kind you can't reason yourself out of because it was installed before reason arrived. He was afraid of Ash. He had always been afraid of Ash. And that fear, she understood this suddenly, completely, was the entire reason he wanted him. The things that frighten us most are the things we most want to own. "Step aside, old man," Mordrin said. "I've been asked to step aside before," Aldrich replied pleasantly. "I find it rarely improves the situation." Mordrin raised his hand. What came from it was not fire and not light and not quite darkness. It was something between all three, a pressure that moved through the air like a sound felt in the chest rather than heard, and it hit Aldrich square and he went down, one knee striking the floor, one hand catching the ground, his head bowing under the weight of it. "Aldrich," Wren lurched forward. Ash caught her, one massive foreleg across her path, stopping her the way a gate stops rushing water. She pushed against him and he held, and she looked up at him with panic rising in her throat, and he looked back with those gold eyes that said, "Not yet. Wait." She waited. Mordrin crossed the room toward Ash. His men fanned out. The cabin had never felt smaller. "You've run long enough," Mordrin said to the wolf. "Both of you." He meant the curse. He meant the years. He meant whatever arrangement existed between this man and whatever had been done to Ash in that palace with the cold throne and the colder smile. Something about the way he said it, the proprietary weight of it. The satisfaction told Wren that Mordrin had not created the curse, but he had certainly benefited from it. That he had been waiting, through all the years of Ash's captivity, for exactly this, to be the one who brought the creature back. She looked at Uncle Drav. He was staring at the floor. Something happened inside her then. Not anger, not even grief. Something quieter and more final, the closing of a door she had been holding open for 3 years, hoping someone would walk through it. He was not going to walk through it. He had made his choice in the forest, and he was making it again now, and he would go on making it because that was who he was, and who he was had nothing to do with her, had never had anything to do with her, and she could put that down now. She put it down. And her hands came up. She did not plan it. She did not understand it fully even as it happened. She reached for the locket, her mother's locket, warm against her sternum, always warm, and she pressed it flat with one palm, and she reached the other hand outward toward Mordrin, and she did the only thing she knew how to do. She felt. She opened herself completely, and she felt him, all of him, everything running beneath the surface of that controlled, pleasant, calculating exterior. She felt the fear first, the old animal fear of wildness and power and things that could not be owned, the fear that had driven every choice he had ever made. She felt beneath that the loneliness, cavernous, architectural, the loneliness of a man who had spent his entire life acquiring and controlling, because connection had always felt like a door he didn't know how to open. She felt beneath even that something she hadn't expected. Grief. Real and unresolved. An old wound he had never let anyone touch. She did not absorb it. She did not take it into herself. She did what Aldrich had said. She held her ground. Instead, she reflected it. Gently, completely. Like a still pool showing the sky exactly as it is, without judgment, without addition. She showed him himself. Mordrin stopped walking. He stood in the center of the cabin with his hand raised and his power crackling at his fingertips, and his face, his controlled, pleasant, calculating face, began to come apart. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouts or collapse. It came apart the way ice comes apart in spring, from the inside first, the structure failing before the surface shows it. He lowered his hand. His men looked at each other. Neither of them moved. Wren kept her hand extended. She kept showing him. All of it. Every hollow place and every locked door and every choice made from fear rather than anything resembling genuine desire. She showed him the shape of the life he had built and the shape of the life he could have built, and the distance between them, measured not in years but in choices, each one of which he had still, barely time to unmake. She felt Ash move beside her. He stepped forward, slowly, no threat in it. The way he had moved toward her in the snow on that 5th morning, crossing the distance between them inch by careful inch, giving her every opportunity to step back. He stopped in front of Mordrin. And Wren would spend years trying to find language for this, years in which she would eventually stop trying and simply hold it as a thing known in the body rather than the mind. Ash lowered his great head. Not in submission, in something older than that. Something that preceded the word for mercy and contained it entirely. An offering of the thing Mordrin had never known how to receive. Recognition. I see you. I know what you are underneath all of this, and I am not your enemy. Mordrin's hand dropped to his side. The crackling at his fingertips went dark. In the sudden silence, the locket at Wren's chest flared, not with heat, not with pain, but with a warmth so specific and so familiar that her eyes filled without warning. Her mother. The warmth of her mother, stored all these years in the silver, released now like light through a crack in stone. It moved outward from her in a wave. It hit Ash at the center of his chest. The sound that followed was not loud. It was the sound a held breath makes when it is finally released, the sound of something that has been compressed for a very long time returning to its original shape. Light moved through Ash's silver fur, not white light, not golden, something between the two, and the shape of him shifted and grew and changed, and Wren had to close her eyes against it, and when she opened them. He was standing, not on 4 legs, on 2. Tall, dark-haired, young or young-seeming, with the kind of face that carries its history visibly, every year of captivity written in the set of the jaw and the steadiness of the eyes. The wound at his shoulder had not disappeared. It was there, a scar beneath a torn shirt, the same scar she had pressed her fingers against and seen the palace and the throne and the cold man speaking the curse. The eyes were the same. Gold, steady, holding more than she had words for. He looked at his hands for a long moment. Then he looked at her. And Wren, who had spent 3 years learning to make herself invisible, who had been taught by silence and cold rooms, and uncles turned back that she was something to be endured rather than held, stood completely still in the wreckage of a small cabin at the edge of a forest and let herself be seen. Fully, for the first time. By someone who had been waiting, she understood now, as long as she had. Uncle Drav turned and walked out the door. No one stopped him. No one needed to. Mordrin stood for a long moment in the center of the room, something working behind his eyes that she could still feel, the slow, uncomfortable turning of a man examining himself honestly, perhaps for the first time. Then, without a word, without his men, he walked out into the pale morning light and kept walking and did not look back. Aldrich rose from his knee. He looked at the young man standing where the wolf had stood, and his face did something complicated and private, something with grief in it and relief in equal measure. and he pressed the back of his hand briefly to his mouth before he had full control of himself again. Then he straightened. "Well," Aldrich said, with the careful steadiness of someone building composure brick by brick, "there you are." The young man, the prince, the wolf, the creature who had pressed his warmth against her side through 17 frozen mornings, looked at him, then back at Wren. "There I am," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. The first time she had heard it in human language, and yet somehow the least surprising sound she had ever heard, because she already knew its register. She had felt it in his chest for 17 days. She had heard it in the low warning sound and the exhale of relief and the single movement of a tail that meant everything. She had always known his voice. She just hadn't known it would sound like this. Like something returned from very far away. Like something that had found, against all odds and all reason, exactly where it was supposed to be. His name was Kalen. Not the wolf name she had given him, Ash, though he said, when she told him, that it was the best name he had ever been given. Better than the one stitched into royal registers and spoken in throne rooms with the particular formality of people who confuse titles with truth. Ash, he said quietly, turning it over like something found in a stream, smooth and simple and entirely itself. Yes, that one fits better. She decided to call him both. Kalen when the world was watching, Ash when it was just them. The days that followed the cabin moved slowly, which was what they needed. Aldrich would not hear of travel until the wound at Kalen's shoulder had closed properly. It had carried the curse inside it, he explained, which meant it healed differently than ordinary wounds, from the inside out, and rushing it would only drive the remnants deeper. Kalen accepted this with the particular patience of someone who had spent years learning to measure time differently. Wren accepted it because it meant more mornings in the small, warm cabin, with the fire going and the forest quiet outside, and no one requiring her to be smaller than she was. She had not known, until now, how much of her energy had gone toward that, toward smallness, toward taking up less space, making less sound, needing less, asking for nothing. It had felt like survival for so long that she had stopped noticing it was also a kind of slow disappearing. In Aldrich's cabin, she was not required to disappear. She expanded into the space without meaning to. She left her coat on the chair nearest the fire. She asked questions at dinner, real ones, the kind she had been storing for years with nowhere to put them. She laughed once on the third evening. At something Kalen said, and the sound surprised her so completely that she stopped and touched her own throat, as if checking whether the laugh had actually come from her. Kalen looked at her with those gold eyes. "You should do that more," he said. "Do what?" "Take up room." She looked away, but she didn't argue. Aldrich, it emerged over those slow days, was not simply an old man in a forest cabin. He had been, in the years before Kalen's cursing, something adjacent to a royal advisor, not officially, not with a title, but in the way that truly useful people rarely carry official titles. He had known Kalen's mother, Queen Ara, since before Kalen was born. He had known about the curse almost from the moment it was cast. He had spent the intervening years in this cabin, at the edge of this forest, in the specific proximity of Millhaven, not by accident. He had been waiting for the wolf to be found. He had been waiting, specifically, for someone like Wren to find him. "Someone like me," she repeated, on the 5th evening, sitting across the fire from him. "What does that mean?" Aldrich considered her for a moment with the careful patience of a man choosing his words not for their impressiveness, but for their precision. "The curse could only be broken by someone who felt without condition," he said. "Not someone who felt strongly. Plenty of people feel strongly. Fear is strong. Hatred is strong. The curse was designed to resist strength." He paused. "It was designed to be unbreakable by anything that could be classified as power. And so the only thing that could break it was the one thing that doesn't classify as power at all to the kind of man who designs curses." "Kindness," Wren said. "Kindness," he confirmed. "Freely given, without expectation, without knowing what it was for." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't know what he was. You didn't know what you were doing. You simply knelt in the snow because something was suffering and you could not walk past suffering. That's not a strategy. That's a character." Wren stared into the fire. "My aunt called it a defect," she said. "Your aunt," Aldrich replied, with the measured diplomacy of a man who has opinions he is choosing to express gently, "was wrong about a great many things." Kalen said nothing, but his hand, resting on the arm of the chair beside her, shifted slightly, close enough that the back of his fingers rested against her wrist, not quite holding, present. She left her wrist where it was. On the 8th day, a rider came from the capital. She arrived alone, which was itself a statement. A woman on a dark horse, riding without escort through forest roads, which meant she was either very capable or very unconcerned about the things that made such roads dangerous. Probably both. She dismounted at the cabin door and removed her hood, and Wren saw a face that stopped her completely. Not because it was frightening, but because it was the face of someone who had been crying for a very long time and had recently, perhaps recently as this morning, decided to stop. Queen Ara was smaller than Wren had imagined a queen would be. She crossed the threshold and she saw her son, standing, human, alive, the scar at his shoulder visible above the collar of the borrowed shirt, and she did not make a sound. She crossed the room in 4 steps and put her arms around him and held him the way you hold something you believed you had lost, which is differently from how you hold anything else. Completely, without performance. Kalen's eyes closed. His arms came up around her. Wren looked away to give them the privacy of it. She found Aldrich at the window, his back to the room, his shoulders carrying the particular tension of a man working very hard to maintain his composure. She watched him press 2 fingers briefly to his eyes. Then he straightened. He cleared his throat. He turned around with an expression of perfect dignity that did not quite conceal the redness at the corners of his eyes. She did not mention it. He did not mention it. Some things are honored best by silence. When Queen Ara finally stepped back from her son, she turned to look at the room at Aldrich, who she crossed to and gripped by the arm with the wordless gratitude of old friendship, and then at Wren. She looked at Wren for a long moment. Wren stood very still. Old instinct, make yourself small, take up less room, be easy to overlook. She caught herself doing it and stopped. She straightened. She met the Queen's eyes. Queen Ara crouched down to her level. She was a queen crouching in a forest cabin with mud on her riding boots and grief redness around her eyes, and somehow this made her more rather than less, the way honesty always does. "He told me what you did," she said. Her voice was low, direct, the voice of someone who had long ago stopped saying things she didn't mean. "Not just the breaking of the curse, all of it, the mornings, the food you brought him, the bolt he took because you would not run without him." She paused. "The way you knelt in the snow the first morning and took his pain into your own hands without asking anything in return." Wren said nothing. Her throat was doing something complicated. "I have been queen for 23 years, Ara continued. "I have met a great many people who were called kind. Very few of them were." She held Wren's gaze. "You are, in the way that costs something, in the way that is not comfortable or convenient." Another pause, shorter this time. "That is the rarest thing I know." Wren felt the locket warm against her chest. Her mother, always her mother. "Will you come with us?" Ara asked, simply, directly. "To the capital, not as a guest, not as a ward." She let the words settle before the last ones. "As family." The word landed in the hollow place in Wren's chest. The one that had been there since she was 4 years old, since the fever and the silence and the doorstep, and 3 years of being the inconvenience, the leak in the roof, the ghost girl who felt too much. The hollow place received it. Filled. She looked at Kalen. He was watching her with those gold eyes, patient as he had always been patient, giving her the distance to decide, the way he had crossed toward her inch by careful inch in the snow and let her set the pace. She looked at Aldrich. He raised an eyebrow that contained, she was fairly certain, an entire editorial opinion about what her answer should be. She looked back at the Queen. "Yes," she said. It was the easiest word she had ever said, and the biggest. They left the following morning, Ara and Kalen and Wren, with Aldrich riding alongside on a horse that seemed mildly offended by his presence, but had resigned itself to the situation. The forest was bright with early light, the kind of cold, clear morning where everything has edges, and the sky is the specific blue of something washed completely clean. Ren rode in front of Kalen, which had been entirely his suggestion, and which she had accepted after approximately no deliberation. She was small enough that she fit easily in the space his arms made around the reins, and the warmth of him at her back was the same warmth she had known for 17 mornings in the snow. The same density, the same steadiness, just differently shaped now. She reached up and held the locket. Her mother's warmth, her own warmth, the warmth of the boy behind her who had once been a wolf, who had once been a prince who had spent years in the dark and emerged from it choosing gentleness before anything else. The warmth of the old man riding ahead with his back straight and his coat impractical for the weather and his eyes, when he turned to check on them, carrying the specific contentment of someone who had waited a very long time for something and was now watching it arrive. The warmth of a queen who had used the word family and meant it without conditions. The trees opened onto the road. Ren did not look back at Millhaven. Not out of bitterness. That door was closed now, cleanly, the way doors close when you have simply finished with what was on the other side. She looked forward, at the road stretching toward the capital, at the morning light lying across it in long, pale strips. She was 8 years old. She had survived a great deal already. She was just getting started. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, longer, possibly, than memory reached, she was not making herself small to fit the space available. She was simply herself, taking up exactly as much room as she needed. Which turned out, she was discovering to be quite a lot. And that is where we leave her. Not at the end of something, at the beginning. Ren, who was taught that feeling too much was a flaw, who was told that kindness was weakness, who knelt in the snow for a dying wolf with nothing to offer but her presence and her open hands, and changed everything. Because that is what kindness actually does. Not loudly, not immediately, not in ways that are always visible or celebrated or rewarded in the moment. It works slowly, the way roots work, underground, unseen, restructuring everything from beneath. She didn't save him because she knew he was a prince. She saved him because he was suffering. That is the whole story. That has always been the whole story. If this story moved something in you, if you felt Ren's loneliness, or held your breath when Ash took that bolt, or felt your chest open when the Queen said the word family, then you already understand what this channel is about. Stories that remind us what we're actually made of. Hit that like button if Ren and Ash earned it today. It takes 1 second and it tells us to keep going. Subscribe if you're new here. We release stories like this every week. Stories about the overlooked, the quietly brave, the ones who chose kindness when no one was watching and changed everything because of it. And drop a comment below. Tell us which moment got you. Was it the snow, the bolt, the word family? We read every single one. Share this with someone who needs reminding today that their sensitivity is not a weakness, that feeling deeply is not a defect, that the most powerful thing in any room is almost never the loudest. There are more stories waiting. We will see you in the next one.